Good morning and welcome to my neighborhood. Today, I wanted to follow up on Maisel, Henry, and Kessler, the previous episode, and talk about humor and representational drift, because it has to do with taking Arthur Kessler's ideas of self-destructive behavior and making them a little bit more positive. Okay, a lot more positive, but it's intriguing, this idea of representational drift, because it applies to not only neurology, where it's currently being talked about quite a bit, but it applies to sociology, organizational behavior, and all manner of things in terms of evolution and any kind of dynamic systems, complex systems, as Kessler just started to get into in his Janus book. So, where do we start? The thing that's come out most recently is a mouse study. Yeah, and what they did is they looked at neural activity in mice as they were exposed to different smells. And they noticed that the neurons representing the smells, or populations of neurons representing smells and responses to smells, changed over time, while maintaining the ability to recognize the smells. And that's important, because we're not talking about stuff just going away. We're talking about different populations of neurons representing the same information. Here comes the rain. Hopefully there's enough trees above me that I won't get too wet. So, how does this apply? And I should note that in a month's time, whether they've been stimulated or not, and they have the same memory and expert behavior and all that kind of stuff, what happens is that, you know, you've got a 1 in 15 chance that the same neuron is even involved in this representation of memory. And so it happens quite quickly. We have this sense of continuity of our bodies and ourselves and who we are, and yet, arguably, our body changes. The cells in our bodies change. Our red blood cells change on a very regular basis. Our biome changes. The cells in our bodies change. And yet, for some reason that we don't really fully understand, we still think we're us. So, representational drift. How we know things in a population of neurons, in this case, in the mouse study, where that individual neurons in that population change over time. What's this got to do with humor? This is nuts. Well, it has a lot to do with humor. Because if I tell you something silly, like, I always tell the truth, except today when everything I say is a lie. Now, okay, it's a kind of joke, but it makes you go through it several times until you realize that it's an irreducible paradox. What does this do? And what's this got to do with representational drift? So one of the theories is that representational drift happens in neurons because neurons die, we get new neurons. Yes, we do get new neurons, not just the ones we're born with. And so the memories have to move around. So that's one idea. Another idea, as illustrated by this paradox, I always tell the truth, except today when everything I say is a lie, is that in neural networks, when we optimize and reduce the dimensionality of the networks, and many neural networks have very high dimensionality, thousands of dimensions, when we reduce the dimensionality to make a smaller, more optimal, focused network that can contain the knowledge, we also may reduce its ability to learn new things. So it's been hypothesized that higher dimensionality allows you to learn more. It has additional weight, processing requirements, and when they look at the neural structure of mice or rats running through a maze, you would think that the maze would be encoded, a fairly simple linear encoding of, turn left, turn right, go ahead, go straight, and come out and get your prize. But there is this concept of encoding null spaces. This is the information that's not there. And it makes a much more complex representation, but allows more flexibility in learning, perhaps curiosity. So when somebody tells you a joke or a pun, as annoying as they may be, what they're doing is they're causing additional areas of your brain to light up simultaneously. And in the same way that famous light bulb cartoon of the eureka moment of, ha, I discovered this thing happens, the same thing happens in the joke. But by definition, in this case, it's a self-destructive property because it changes you. It lights up neurons together that didn't light up before. You discovered something. So that takes the self-destruction that we talked about in a previous episode of Maisel, Henry, and Kessler into a more positive vein. The idea that these sudden shifts, these puns, these jokes, how many seconds in a year from Forrest Gump? Well, there's 12. January 2nd, February 2nd, and so on. These are not the answers that you've been trained to expect in school. Some people will go to them directly. Most people won't. Because there's an acculturation to do a calculation, to go seconds, right? So seconds, how many seconds in a minute, how many minutes in an hour, how many hours in a day, how many days in a week, how many weeks in a year, and so on. But 12, I like 12 as an answer, it's really good. So just as an illustration, these things create something like that eureka moment of discovery. They fire neurons together that have maybe never fired before. And they restructure your memory, your representation of that thing. They give them something else connected to it that wasn't connected before. And this is why humor is so important. It allows us to help people make these connections. And to the extent that I was talking about in the previous episodes of Maisel, Henry, and Kessler, this is kind of what we're talking about. How do you get people in a constructive way to see something that they didn't see before? And there's something funny about that. The nature of laughter is something about surprise, delight, sometimes not delight. Something clicks, something connects, and we laugh. And not only that, something connects when we're in a group where it connects with a bunch of different people. So, let's take this a little further out on a limb. In an article published in The Atlantic recently about this, there was a quote from a professor, And he said, you know, you can look at an analogy of populations, of human populations. And people can change their behavior within the population. And yet the capabilities and memories and outcomes in response to stimulus of that population may remain the same. They might change too. But you can replace individuals. And this term comes from neural studies where you're looking at individual neurons to test this hypothesis, but you're looking at populations of neurons that generate action, generate recognition. So, can we take this into sociology? There's a tremendous tendency to want to rationalize things, to take them down to a logical thing. You know the old joke about the Scottish mathematician when he was asked after having his first child, is it a boy or a girl? And of course, he says yes. Because strictly speaking, that's correct. We have a tendency in our society to model our society not on complex systems, not on our intuitive or gut feel, and our guts have way more neurons than our spinal cord does, for instance, and is responsible for generating a lot of chemicals that are used to drive our brain. So gut feelings may actually have a basis in science in some way or other. But the idea that we model our whole society on a thin veneer of rational thought, which is sometimes very useful, but kind of ignores the massive processes underlying that. So, let's look a little bit deeper. Why do we laugh? Why do we laugh? We laugh when we hit something unexpected. Sometimes we laugh and we can't stop laughing. You know, that compulsive laughter when you look at somebody and it's just, you can't stop laughing. What is the joke? Well, wow. That is a Dash 8 surveillance aircraft going overhead. I think. It's quite noisy. Don't know if you can hear it. Flies over this area regularly. Not sure what they're doing. Okay, so laughter. We don't understand humor very well. We don't understand laughter very well, but this idea that you can get feedback, humor is sometimes isolated, but more often it's with other people. It's in groups. It has to do with an unexpected sudden revelation or a shared, as in uncontrollable, look at somebody and you can't stop laughing. A shared understanding. This shared understanding appears to be quite important. And the question becomes, is humor, is laughter, is this sense of joke and play, it is similar in society to representational drift in our neurons. The self-destructive tendencies referenced to Arthur Koestler in the previous episode aren't well delineated. But if in fact, when we are given something or we see something new we've never noticed before, I wonder if that doesn't cause more representational drift than might have otherwise happened. Because there is theories that, in addition to the fact that, our bodies keep refreshing themselves with new physical components, cells and stuff, neurons, that one of the reasons for representational drift in neurons is learning, simply learning. We learn new stuff, we use stuff, we learn it, and even when somebody has learned to the point of expert level, from the point of view of the mouse studies so far, we know that they change. The neurons that represent the stimulus continue to change. So that probably happens with us too. Just a guess. Not for real, but... So what happens when somebody starts talking about these things that have shifted? Right now, there's all sorts of talk about going back to work. This creates some of the best fodder for stand-up comics, because we can address the discrepancies that one neural representation sees over another. This creates enormous wealth in our communities in a sense of learning. We are able to see things that we didn't see before. And sometimes our curiosity is piqued. There's a funny thing that happens with laughter. They talk about laughter yoga. There's a release. It's a mammalian, human, maybe chimpanzee release. It's a social thing. And there's a sense of gratitude that comes with laughter when you think about it. So, things change, is the bottom line. Things change more than we think. They change from a neural level all the way up to everything that we can possibly conceive. But at a microcosmic, narcissistic community level, they change too. So, the nature of work changes. The nature of who we are changes. The nature of how we interact with other people changes. And the joke is, always, that this is normal. Take any joke. You start with, this is normal. And then you break it. And the funniest things are when I predicate something that is normal that is not, or that is perceived not to be. Since the movie of the women that made the nude calendar in Britain came out, there has been nude calendars made. And the ones that have sold well are entirely predicated on the joke, this is normal, as shown in the photographs. And there's a lot of jokes that way. So those kind of jokes challenge our current neural representation. They challenge our current social representation. They work because they kind of play against something that exists and present it differently. So that's just one way to twist something. But all the jokes play against our temporal, spatial information flow, that we are consistent, we are the same. Knowledge doesn't change, the world doesn't change, but it does. And the rate of change does not seem to be particularly consistent, particularly across people. And then we have the things that we were talking about previously in Maisel, Henry, and Kessler. That is the idea that individuals and communities of individuals create kind of another drawing against. We want to exist as an independent individual, but we also want to submerge into the cultures that we're within. We want to be part. So you start to take these things, and of course, when you talk about the neurons triggering, we're not just talking about on and off. We're talking about variable levels of response. And so this is also true in societies and communities. This idea of higher dimensional representation, allowing us to be more flexible, more viable, can be used in management as well, allowing for a larger amount of things to be taken into account, allows us to notice factors that, if you want to think about it from a bell curve point of view, we're looking at things that are way out on the long tail that very often when we make models of things we disregard because they're so far out there that it doesn't matter. But in complex systems, those outliers often shift to become dependent variables. So we're talking about drift. We're talking about drift in how we represent things from a neural level, from a neural networks level, from a management level, from a organizational level, from a relationship level. We're talking about the pressure against wanting to be individual and wanting to be immersed in a population. And when they talk about neurons, they do talk about individual neurons, and they talk about populations, and they talk about populations as retaining characteristics in memory, even when the neurons change, the physical neurons change, or the physical people change. But I think that the stresses between these things and highlighting them with something as simple as a pun probably lights up more of your brain at any given time and creates the delight, that light bulb moment that is the response to a joke that causes you to laugh. Just a guess. We'll go deeper on this stuff later. But this is just a taste of representational drift in the context of humor. Thank you for watching today. I know this has been kind of a weird topic. You can watch my other videos. They're all a little strange, but they do take you somewhere. And they do build on each other, and they do interconnect. So, subscribe, click the bell if you want to be notified. Have a look at some of the other videos. They're on YouTube and they're on Facebook. So if you're having trouble finding them on Zoomers of the Sunshine Coast, for instance, you can find one and then click on the link to take you back to the YouTube version and then look at the whole group. So I hope that helps. It's easier to see them gathered together on YouTube. And the resolution's better too sometimes. So I'm very grateful that you're here. I delight when somebody takes these things out, takes them the next step and says, hey, look, we thought this was happening. It really happened. And what the heck does that mean? And not only that, but it's happening a whole lot faster than we thought. So maybe we need to look at this in terms of neural networks, how we develop neural networks, how we restructure them, how we reduce them. It is just lovely to have this to chew on. I really like it. So thank you. I'm very grateful to all the researchers. I'm very grateful for you out there. I see you, at least in my imagination. So, thank you again. Have a good day. We'll see you next time.